Yeah, if you'll have me.
All right. What's your name, age, and pronouns, please?
Luke, 23, and I'm a he/him type.
Okay, Luke. Uh, can let me know what you want to debate about, please, friend.
Yeah, so I have a bit of a bounce around type thing because I have a previous talk I had with you on police, but I don't really want to talk about that. I want to start off just by asking you, in terms of like the trans identity, do you think that people are like born into this world trans, like in the wrong body, or how do you like conceptualize that?
I think people are predisposed to be trans or cis at birth. I think that it you're whether or not you let me rephrase that. I think people are predisposed whether or not they align or disalign with their sex, whether or not that alignment makes you trans non-binary, non-binary, gender fluid, whatever it might make you. I think you're just predisposed to either being gender congruent or gender incongruent.
Mm. So like, just so I can conceptualize it, you're saying that like, you know, was it Timmy was born, with all the signs of being a male. However, due to a brainwave, we can tell they're probably going to not be that down the line.
No, we would have no way of knowing up until they're able to start verbalizing whether or not they are these things, right? We can't tell if you're trans based on your brain waves or anything. We just know that like to some degree hormone washes in utero can influence gender identity, and we know that gender identity is like a neurological or a neurosocial concept. So half of what gender identity is just like in the brain. But again, it's not that they are these things, it's that they're predisposed to be these things. So when you're predisposed, there's some kind of trigger in life that will start presenting this identity. And typically when it comes to gender, from the research I've done, the trigger is just being alive for enough time and gaining enough subconscious information about of the different schemas of males and females.
Okay, but that's correct me if I'm wrong. I'm trying to get this. So it's gender identity or gender as identity, not gender as description. Yes.
Yeah. Because gender. So yes. So gender is going to be twofold. There's gender on a societal level, which gender on a societal level is just going to be the roles, expressions, things like that. And like the categories of gender that we would typically put people in, and then gender on the interpersonal level, which is going to be your gender identity and how your brain relates to your sex. So yes, gender is like a twofold thing. That's why I tend to say it's a neurosocial concept.
Okay, I get you there. So with that, then to what degree should gender identity and gender descriptor be the same thing? Like, on what grounds should those be the same?
Well, gender identity. So when you say gender descriptor, are you talking about specifically how we define the different gender roles, or how we define the different gender archetypes in society?
Well, I'm really just talking about like identifying like man or woman. I have this friend, Jessica. I'm going to introduce her. Hey, this is a woman. And like with that word, the person who hears it understands, okay, these things are applicable to Jessica. I'm using it in that sense, whatever that is in terms of the lingo.
Yeah, I would just say that it would fully, in order to know what somebody is, it's fully got to be a self-identification thing, right? Because there's no other way to do it. With women and men being social categories, there's no way to know who fits into that category without it being a self-identification thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, because hold on, I'm going to Google the word phenotype, because I do not use that in my contemporary lingo, so to speak.
Phenotype is just going to be like physical attributes and stuff like that.
I guess I got the wrong one. It says just a piece bearing of the next. Anyway, I digress. But anyway, like with the physical phenotype, though, how I operate in using my language, I want to like communicate certain points to other people, as most people do, and I find that if you identify as one thing, I don't think that's necessarily mutually, if you identify personally as one thing, I don't see how that like has a direct implication onto what you are. You know what I
Well,
mean?
so the issue with this would be when we're looking at phenotypic expression. So if we're saying that gender would only be able to be decided by some phenotypic level, there are going to be people who don't fit into these categories that you would say are men or women, right? There are going to be people who don't fit into those phenotypic
Yeah.
categories. So because of this, I don't believe we can base gender this way, right? So let's say the example I like to use is, let's say we're letting somebody into a bathroom, right? If I go, you can only go
Yeah.
into this bathroom if you meet certain phenotypical attributes that would point to me that you're a woman, and then a woman shows up who doesn't have these, what do I do? And if I'm saying you can get in without them, then clearly they aren't that important. There's clearly some other aspect. I also don't know what phenotypic attributes we would say are like directly tied to womanhood that all women across the board share. I don't think one of these exists. I think there are always going to be outliers, and I try to look at least definitionally in the term that's going to be the most inclusive of everybody that would fit into this category socially.
I could see. Okay, I see your argument there, but I think that in terms of like making general categories for broad, like was it just because there are some exceptions? I don't think that inherently means that a definition is flawed. Like we have genetic mutations that go on all the time. Is there then therefore no way to properly define any one person because there are so many genetic variations of what can make a human slightly different, and we now
That's
no
what I'm
longer.
talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Because like otherwise, you would be saying if there's some phenotypical thing that does, you're saying that this is a necessary condition to be a woman, and I don't believe that there are any necessary conditions other than having a gender identity that aligns in this sense. There's no other necessary conditions that wouldn't exclude somebody who you or I would say is a woman.
Yeah, I think for me, then that would have to be like the ability to give birth, with the exception of abnormalities or like genetic
But wait, that
deficiencies for
doesn't
being
that
women.
doesn't work as a necessary condition, friend, because you're saying the necessary condition is the ability to give birth unless you can't. Right? That doesn't work as a necessary
Well, yeah,
condition.
are,
You
well, it's the ability that if there were no genetic abnormalities, you have the facilities to give birth, provided there wasn't any sort of action either taken personally or just genetically that went wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, but if you're going to say that, yeah, I don't think this. I just don't believe this works, because I think if you're going to say that the ability to do this is what makes you a woman, you can't then discount and then say, but we're going to make exceptions for everybody that can't do it because of X or Y reason, right? That's not how a necessary condition would work, right? If we're saying it's necessary, it has to be necessary. There can't be an unless or a. Now, if you're saying typical, that's a different conversation. If you're saying, well, it's typical of women to give birth, that's fine. I would just say trans women are in the atypical, right? But if we're going to go with a necessary condition, necessary conditions don't have exceptions.
Okay, I hear what you're saying there, but also, if you wouldn't mind, let's switch to dudes and the definition of being a man, just because I feel like we don't talk about that enough. We talk all the time about like trans women and their identity. Let's talk about the men for a bit. So, like,
Okay.
in order to be a man, for example, I think you need to, with the phenotype, and this is basically a one-to-one transfer with only male reproductive ability, is the ability to, with provided that genetic, again, there are no genetic abnormalities, but you have all the facilities to like impregnate.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Like barring genetic abnormalities, you have all of the inner facilities to impregnate. However, if whether or not they're working or not, that's irrelevant to. You have the facilities to do this action.
I don't understand what this has to do with men.
Well, the definition of a man would talk about the phenotype. For me personally, and I would say that having the ability to, not the ability to impregnate. Sorry, I did that too many times. I'm talking about having the reproductive organs that, whether or not they work, they could impregnate if they were working. The functionality of it is not necessarily the phenotype; it's the inclusion of that in your being.
Yeah, I'm just gonna have the same. I'm gonna have the same contentions that I had previously, right? My contentions would be the same thing, that we're claiming it's a necessary condition. There can be no outliers in a necessary condition. So it can't be you have to have these, but if it's not working, you still count. It would have to be you have to have these. So for instance, I would say
Right.
a necessary condition of a like if I'm giving an example, let me think of an example. Um, one of the necessary conditions of a of a of a I don't even know how I don't even have an example that I'm blanking on
Well,
an
I
example.
think I think I could actually give you an example of what you're saying,
Sure.
provided I understand what you're saying. If a person, if I say a person needs to have two legs, that's just what a person is, and there's a person with no legs, that is still that. Does that make
Yeah.
it not a person? That's what
Yeah.
you're on about.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Yes. If like so, for instance, if my necessary condition to be human is to have human DNA, I wouldn't say unless barring some genetic malfeasance. Like no, if you don't have human DNA, you're not human, right? But yes, if I were to say the necessary conditions for being a human is to have two legs, then I can't say that people who are genetically don't have two legs would be human because that is my necessary condition. But that's why I don't think having necessary conditions for things such as gender or sex, or even just like what makes a person, having necessary conditions for these really I don't even know if advanced is the word, but these really complex topics that where like when we look at human sexual development and human gender development that are so expansive, having necessary conditions does nothing but hurt us in our quest to categorize these things because nothing is ever going to fit neatly into that necessary condition if we're just trying to look at some phenotypic representation because humans are just too varied for that to be the case.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that. However, just because not everything can fit within a certain like word, that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't use words to communicate general ideas. Like we could do the same thing with. Well, I guess we should stick into male. Nah, yeah, I guess we'll stick with males just because that's what we've been introduced to. I don't want to switch it up, but let's say that in general, men have a penis, and in general, more often than not, if you say, "Hey, this is a man," typically the average boomer, old person will be like, "Oh, well, then he must have or they must have a penis." I think that is important to the
Stefana
degree
Ash
that if we keep
2234
on
donated $3.
picking and choosing definitions, they kind of lose the exact like ability to communicate to general people what they mean. You know what I'm saying?
No, I would disagree. I don't think being rigid in this is what's going to be what's going to allow you to communicate. What allows you to communicate when we're talking about words. So for instance, if I say to somebody, "Hey, a woman is coming over tomorrow," and I don't give any other details besides a woman, all they're going to do is in their heads, they're going to go through hundreds upon hundreds of and this has happened so quickly. It happens within an instant. Your brain recalls hundreds of information about every woman you've seen and like just different phenotypical attributes, but you don't ever recall just like one specific thing. Like the way we converse isn't rigid like that. The way we communicate with each other is so much more complex and varied, and we have a ton of example of concepts or identities or things where when we convey this, we're not conveying a specific thing. So like if I told you, "Hey, I have a friend," right? There is no universal qualifier for what a friend is. What I believe a friend is could be vastly different from what you do. But we recognize when we say friend, we recall that information of what we value as a friend, and we just extrapolate this onto the other person. So yeah, I would just argue with that prescription of how we use language.
I can see where you're coming for. I can see that, but again, within that example of a friends, I can also tell some pretty generally held things, such as they're not. Well, they might be like hostile in quotation marks, but like they're not gonna actively try to pursue your downfall. But I guess you would then take the caveat of saying, well, you don't necessarily know that because our definitions could be different.
All I'm saying is that we have words that have definitions that are wholly subjective to the individual, and everybody's or maybe not definitions. we have words which have meaning that is wholly subjective. So friend can have a definition, but what it means to be a friend would be wholly subjective to the person. And I think we can have definitions of man and women, and then what it means to be a man and woman would be different for each person. Right? That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then so we respect everybody's definitions of men and women then, basically?
I would say we just
Like
respect everybody's subjective ideas of what men and women are. Right? Like I would say the same thing if a like staunch conservative woman came up and said, "Well, I'm a woman because I have XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes." Sorry, that's why I'm a woman. I'm like, okay, I respect that. Yeah, that's to you.
yeah,
That's
you're
what a
up.
woman is. So yeah, I just don't think you can then tell another person what a woman is. Like if they are or not a woman based on you having those beliefs.
Okay, yeah. I guess that makes sense, but just like to the point that if I were like, if I was introducing one of my trans friends to like people I play Xbox with, and already a bad sign, but you know what I'm saying, like, and they probably won't see our definitions as the same, you know. But I don't know. I guess that just kind of like, I guess I see where it's coming from, but again, that's not really. Well, I guess the thing is like, if your definition of women exists different from my definition of, and we go back to women again. There I go. But anyway, I digress. If you go into what your definition of women is versus my definition of women, I think there will be just a little bit of like growing pains in communication at the very least. But hey, you know, as long as it's not fucking life or death stuff, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't think any of the
But
objections to like how we relate to each other on that level can't be overcome with like one more qualifying question. You know what I mean?
yeah, and that's just a thing of respect. You know, respect everybody, give it that, and all that jazz. All right. But that's not really the main thing I want to talk to you about. Is I remember, and this is a while back, so you might have changed your views, or you might have gotten some other evidence. You had an interesting topic on trans individuals in sports, and particularly you said something about completely making it so there was no more male and female sports leagues. It was all just one conglomerate league. Do you still believe that?
Yeah, I just personally don't see the issue with having a co-ed leagues in things that aren't like I do think that like certain contact sports or certain let me rephrase that certain fighting sports like boxing, MMA, I think those are fine to keep those by weight class, but like I don't see the necessity of having sports personally I don't see the necessity of making sports separated by gender.
I mean, I get where you're. That's a more balanced take, especially with weight classes, because you know, obviously, I did wrestling for 4 years in high school. Like, if I go up against one of our lightweights, I could have like as terrible form as ever. I'm gonna beat him every single day of the week. That's just how it is. However, the interesting thing about like particularly men and women is there is a certain degree of where men are more often than not physically more powerful than women based off of our ability to establish muscle and keep it. It's just a genetic advantage over a female.
Yeah, I don't think that that this advantage matters in most sports. I think most sports what's actually going to come down to it is going to be skill and training. I think you can be as big and powerful as you want, but if you don't have the skill to do any of that, then it doesn't matter, you know what I mean?
That is mostly true. Again, I go back to wrestling where, you know, weight classes, again, massive thing. I don't need good form to be a lightweight, for example. However,
I
especially,
don't know.
and
I've
it's
seen
also
I've seen
true.
some I've seen people who are I've seen people who are like smaller in different classes eat up bigger people because
Yeah,
they for whatever reason it might be. I think a good rule of thumb is like in contact fighting sports like that, weight class, like that's a good rule of thumb to have. But like when it comes to sports that don't have anything to do with that, I think it doesn't matter. Like I said, I think you could be the smallest person in the world and still shoot a basketball better than Shaquille O'Neal. right? You can make free throws better than Shaq can, right? You might be faster too. So I think it really just comes down to, in my opinion, I just don't see the point of splitting a lot of these things.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from with that, but like with your example though of, you can shoot better free throws than Shaq even if you're 2 feet tall. Can you dunk though?
Yeah, but what does it
Like
matter?
unless
What
you
does it
really
matter if you can dunk or not? I would
dunking is
personally, I would say dunking is not as important as being able to shoot a free throw. Right? Dunking means you have to get into the
yeah.
hole and pass a bunch of people, whereas a free throw you can hit from jump.
Yeah, but with you can dunk though, that is inherently a physical advantage and a strategic play that you have over making like a layup, for example, that can be blocked. If your physical body is going up with you, you inherently have more of an advantage than someone going for a layup, for example, because you have your body to block and then get into.
But again,
Back.
dunking only matters if you have the speed to get into the hole and if you're able to get around. Like, you can't dunk against a whole group of people. Like, dunking takes skill. It takes skill to be able to get in there and dunk, right? So it's not just I just disagree on the on this being a metric this being not metric, this being a determining factor based on like some inherent power level. Like, there is also going to be skill and stuff here as well.
Are you kidding me? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to go into this. I got my emotions get the better of me there. But like that's the thing about. But here's the thing: if you're dunking and you don't have any power and like size behind you, then you can get blocked by someone who's bigger and stronger.
Wait, but like dunking. But that's why I said dunking. Dunking isn't the teller when it comes to basketball, right? Dunking is not going to be what is the predominant method that people play basketball on, right? What we're going to be looking at more is your ability to handle a ball, agility, dexterity, whether like and again, I think shooting a free throw way more important measure of how you are at basketball than whether you can dunk or not. The worst basketball player, if they're tall enough, can dunk. Doesn't mean anything. If you can't handle the ball.
But we're going back. I need to go back because we're getting too deep into the logistics of basketball. But like with what you said though, is that skill or is it speed, dexterity, and all that stuff. But inherently, men have a better, easier time keeping on muscle and admittedly having more dexterity and speed that comes from developing that muscle than women have, just based on the biological factors in play.
Wait, I don't think there's any linking between dexterity and the sexes, right? I just would disagree with that.
But dexterity is speed, yeah?
No. Dexterity is not speed, they're different stats.
All right.
Dexterity is like how good you are with your like hands, your arms, your extremities, like that's what dexterity is.
So would dexterity be one of the pivotal defining factors of sports?
Basketball? 100%. How good you are with your hands? Absolutely. Otherwise, you can't, basketball is all about the control of the ball, dribbling the ball, making sure you keep the ball away from other people, shooting the ball, all of these things dexterity is important for.
It is, however, it's also, that is important, but it's not the main determining factor of how good you'll be as an athlete. That includes speed and strength, which are based off muscular development.
Wait, I think we cannot take speed and strength and like just blanket it across the board for every sport, because there are going to be some sports where this doesn't matter, right? Soccer, for instance, speed, very important in soccer. I don't think strength is that important in soccer, right? Football, depending on the position you're in, strength is super important. Other positions, it's not as important. So I think we can't make this blanket rule for all sports when some are going to require different skill sets.
But in general, though, speed, that's going to be the main. Strength is sometimes important, and I guess if we're looking at it, then that's sometimes important. strength for particular sports, but for speed in particular, that is also largely based off of muscular developments and training that men have a distinct advantage of with over women. And speed is something that's applicable in dang near every sport. So would you not see how men in a field of complete equality would excel over most female athletes?
It depends because women typically have a better time at like endurance running. Like they can tend to run for longer they can tend to run faster longer than men can. Men tend to slow down more than women do. So it just depends. In a high speed game where like you have to be fast for a long time, or like in a game where you only have to sprint occasionally. This is why I say like I don't think there's an inherent rule that we can make here.
Okay, but with some sports where let's say it's very quick, very much based off of speed and you get a lot of time to rest in between. It's like I don't know, let's say track for example, which is just straight up running. Would you not see how if you put female and male athletes all in the same league, the males would just more often than not exceed?
Well,
In terms of
again, it depends on what form of running. Again, women are better at endurance running than men are.
all right,
So
it's just a straight up. It's just like straight up 100-meter dash. Not a lot of endurance, just straight speed is what you need.
Yeah, men might be better than women typically. I don't see why this would mean that we shouldn't have it co-ed. But yeah, I don't have anything against saying that men have some physical advantages over women. I know this, and I still think sports should be co-ed.
Okay, so but the thing is, like, in terms of like those advantages and the idea for men to exceed in even some sports, what do you think is going to happen if like women can't really compete with like faster male athletes in these co-ed leagues?
I think that we should have more than one co-ed league. So like you might not be able to compete in League A. Maybe you have to compete in League B.
Okay, but regardless of that, in League, we're talking about just League A because that's in this hypothetical, that's where all the money is made and that's where all the accolades are. People look on their screens to League A and they're like, one day I'm going to be in League A.
Wait, we already do this.
But
we already do this. This is how it already is.
What?
All the money is in the NBA, not the WNBA. People already look and predominantly watch the NBA, right? So nothing would change except that some people, there might be some women who can qualify into League A now, as opposed to now where they don't even have a chance.
Okay, you brought in a point that I need to look into. Of is there a specific rule disqualifying a woman from playing at the NBA level? Because and this is just me with my basic understanding of economics, I think that if a woman could compete at the level of the NBA, then the NBA would try to get her on if there was an equal competitive field. But admittedly, I might have the naivety. I don't know the ins and outs of the rule book of the NBA, so that might be a form of unfortunate discretion being held.
Yeah, I would say I prefer a system where like we just match people up based on the skill that they have. If you can compete at this level, you should be able to play, whether you're a man, a woman, whatever you are.
I see that, and that's a noble thing to have. My only thing is that if, let's say, we took that idea to the logical extreme, and there are some leagues that I think that intramural sports are a great thing and they should be held. But if we do that like across the board, everything is intramural sports. Well, I think the pattern that we're probably going to see, and I could be totally wrong because this is all hypothetical of what could happen in the future. But down the league, I think we would see the men more often than not excel, and women kind of be held like naturally down by just their ability to perform. And if that happens, then I fear that we're just going to go back into the traditional title or traditional gender norms of the past, which would, in a way, and this is again me tinfoil hatting for a bit, but completely diminishing the work of Title IX and the feminist movement to establish that facility.
Yeah, I just disagree. I think that all we're doing right now is separating women into female led leagues that typically don't get the same traction as the male led leagues.
Yeah, and I think that the main evidence I would need to see down the line for that, for me to switch my perspective, is for like, you know, women to go into the men's league and just proper excel at like getting, you know, what is it? Several women like properly excelling in leagues that are dominated by men and like, you know, coming up through the ranks. But as of right now, I don't know of any, you know, case studies to hint at this. But you know, I think that it's a good thing to get to, and definitely I think that if women can compete, they should compete. I think that God, there was again, sorry, I'm going on a complete side tangent here, but there was a story of a couple of women who went to the I think it was the Army Ranger boot camp and completed the whole thing, but sadly we're not allowed to enlist based off of bullshit gender roles, which was absolute shenanigans. But yeah, anyhow, yeah, I think that's but that's pretty much the point that I wanted to discuss. Yeah, I
Right.
also not gonna get into that. I think you might have other calls online. I don't want to take up all your time.
Okay.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. I appreciate the ability to talk. I really enjoyed it.
No problem. Thanks for calling in.
All right, have a good one.
You too.